Welcome to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I'm your host, Theresa Donahue, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations with educational leaders and experts and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. If you didn't know, Branching Minds provides a ton of great resources for implementing MTSS, like our newsletter and our upcoming live virtual mini summit in June. Check out our show notes for links to sign up for both. On Schoolin' Around on the podcast, we love to share stories about the districts that are doing the work with MTSS. And so today I am excited to welcome Dr. Mary O'Mara and Ms. Theresa Donahue from Plainview, Old Beth Page in New York. Dr. Mary O'Mara is the superintendent of schools, and Theresa Donahue is the executive director of MTSS data and assessment. So all of the things. But we're so excited to have you on the podcast today. And so I love to just kind of start out with a fun question about because we work with students, right? So what piece of advice would you give to your teenage self?
You go first. I would say to my teenage self, don't worry, it gets better. Just remember from where you come, who you are, and don't lose sight of your purpose.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think also for me, it's believe in yourself and just remember you're always learning, even if you're not in school. There's always opportunities to learn and grow.
That's awesome. I love your very serious answers. Mine would probably be something like, don't forget to wear sunscreen, things like that.
Well, I graduated in the 80s, so it would be like leave a little less Aquanet in your hair. And
mine was probably don't use peroxide when you're a brunette because it doesn't work like this. It doesn't come out like that. It just comes out brassy. It's not good.
That's fun. Well, I would love to first kind of start. Well, first of all, welcome. I'm glad to have you here. But we can start out by I want to hear a little bit about your district and sort of the demographics, and just tell me about your community. What makes Plainview, Old Beth Page an amazing place to be?
Oh, it's an incredible place to be. First of all, just its geographic location to New York City, to the ocean, to the Long Island Sound. It's the perfect place to live. It's a fairly large school district with over 5,300 students. We have 7 buildings. And the best part of this district is the community is very much involved, and they want to do anything and everything. If we say it's for this group of students or all students, or we're trying to get a new niche somewhere, they come out and support. We're a growing, diverse community. We have a lot of new entrants that are from different countries, which is wonderful. So really the tapestry of our student body is changing, and the community has embraced that.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those, everything that Mary said, I would agree with. It's been for me. I'm new to the district, and everybody has been so welcoming and supportive of the plan and the rollout. So for me, it's really been it's been really great to start here.
So I know that you kind of talked a little bit about sort of your theme for the year and how that really is kind of motivating you in the MTSS work. And so maybe if one of you wants to kind of talk a little bit about your theme and how that sort of drives your MTSS work.
Yeah, so the theme of the district is every student matters, every moment counts, and then I think that itself is what MTSS is all about. We want to make sure that all of our students are being supported in the ways that they need to be supported, and no one is really, as they say, falling through the cracks. If you have a robust MTSS program and you are cyclically analyzing student data, not just academic data, but behavioral data, attendance data, you really are capturing the students that need the most support. And so for me, I think that's what the theme means. And I think that's why it
when they need
with MTSS so well.
We have an incredible staff, and our parents are part of our hiring process. And you never get past this question on any hiring committee's interview. And that's when the parents ask, what are you going to do for the middle of the road students? We are a high performing district, so we have a lot of AP offerings, college offerings. We have one of the most comprehensive special education programs in the county. But people want to know, what about those in the middle? And we really feel that naming our theme as every student matters and every moment counts, coupled with an MTSS plan, we can live that theme pretty easily because everybody, like Theresa says, gets a look through the data that we house on Branching Minds and in other student management systems we have in the district.
I love that I love that you bring parents into the hiring process. That's fantastic because they're impacted by who you hire. And then I love that you ask that question about the middle of the road, because often we focus on what are you going to do for the students that need to be caught up, or how are you going to enrich your curriculum or your work. And I just feel like that question about what are you going to do for the middle of the road is fantastic. And I think MTSS is serves so well to that framework or to that mindset. So I love that you're doing that.
And listen,
So
I just want to add one thing to that, because the middle of the road student could be your 89 average student. But if you don't have a plan that's looking at data, that student slips to an 82 average. And then by the third marking period, maybe a 78. And it's those incremental little slips that don't usually raise any red flags because you're
Mhm.
focused on, the student who might not be passing a class. But this really allows, and Teresa's work in her position has allowed us to look at who dropped 10% points, some of those
yeah,
other smaller movements with our strong students.
yeah. So I know that MTSS was kind of a newer framework for you guys, or maybe you were doing it in some capacity, but a district wide, it was kind of a new initiative. You want to talk a little bit about sort of what led to that, and even just sort of some initial steps that you guys are taking, or have done in the last few years for that work?
Sure. Well, the MTSS work lives on the shoulders of the New York State Requirement for Response to Intervention, RTI 2012, but that only captured K to 4. So the regulations and the requirements really were germane to the K to 4. And then you have academic intervention supports that were a requirement as part of No Child Left Behind. But every district was left to do their own thing. So we found in this district of 7 buildings, 2 middle schools, 1 high school, everyone had some semblance of an MTSS academic intervention support plan, but the implementation, the data used, and some of the people making decisions varied. So we knew that we didn't want to be a district of schools. We wanted to be a school district. So we started with a committee, and we spent a full year working with a committee to create a plan while simultaneously developing our administrators' knowledge of MTSS. Um, but one of the key challenges we faced was we didn't have one person leading the work. And, as a superintendent, even the assistant superintendents, principals, and instructional leaders, their plates are full. So we were very fortunate to be able to, cut down a little bit on the assistant soup level at central office in order to create a new position. And Teresa's been able to lead that work. And, she came in at an apropos time. She was hired at the meeting the board acted on and approved the MTSS district-wide plan.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And so,
so welcome to the district, and thanks for taking the job.
So, to hit the ground running October 4th. And I really feel like I really did hit the ground running. And what was nice was that there was already PD opportunities set up for this school year. So 6 of the mandated 12 hours were set aside for MTSS professional development. And what I very quickly learned was, just as Mary had said, depending on the level, whether it was elementary, middle, or high school, teachers, and administrators were at different levels of understanding as to what MTSS was, what data review looked like, what data are we even looking at. So having conversations with the administrators, the teachers, I was able to get a better understanding of where each building was at. And then I was able to kind of tailor the PD towards their needs. And I think that was really important because they felt like, number one, we weren't talking above their heads. We weren't, telling them something they already knew. And for me, it felt like it really was what those teachers needed at the time in order for them to get a better understanding and move forward with the process.
And we were pretty ambitious because we brought in Branching Minds. We knew this was such audacious work to try to get done while the school year was going. So the benefit of bringing an outside consulting group in was that they could help facilitate the committee work. And then when the committee work was done, they went back and operationalized it in a plan that we then would go back and revise and make edits and personalize it to how it would work for Plainview or Beth Page, which really took some of the legwork out of it for us that enabled us to move kind of quickly. And Teresa's being modest. Also, with her professional development, she wove in with Branching Minds using the platform. So teachers weren't learning just philosophical ideals about MTSS. They were actually working in the platform the district had adopted to house all the information and to be the long-standing student management, employee management system for our MTSS work.
Wow, that sounds like a lot. So, how long was this process as far as when did you start and sort of where are you at in that journey?
Sure. So all of last year, 22, 23, was the development of the actual MTSS plan. And we gave the charge of all buildings, please use your existing plans because we don't want to lose any students while we are building something new. And then, like Teresa said, by October 1st, we had a final copy of the plan to present to the Board of Education. They approved it, but we had already over the summer set out the professional development schedule. So all the teachers came back knowing and also, another thing we did, as I said earlier, this is a very involved community. So we started to teach our PTAs, our parent groups, a little bit
Mm,
about MTSS and what our goals were for the first year with MTSS. And they've kind of been very patient because for a long time they've been asking, what are you doing for all the students? We see a lot of efforts put for your high performing and your special education 504 kids, but we're kind of feeling like the middle of the road kid is possibly getting lost and not getting supports when they need it at the time they need it. So they were patient. So
Yeah.
I think they're seeing some of the fruits of that. Teresa's working on
Yeah.
something with parents right now.
Yeah, the parents have been fantastic. Working with the PTA has been really wonderful, and just helping them understand again what MTSS is, what Branching Minds allows us to do, and then what are some of the data points that that we are putting together to get a better understanding of their children. And one of the things that they approached us with was, you have a teacher surveys. Could we somehow put together a parent survey where parents are giving some information about their children to the teacher, before the year starts? And I think that's a fantastic idea. As
yeah,
a teacher, it was something I always did on back to school night. Give me 3 facts about your child I need to know to help them be a better learner. So in order, for us to put something like that together, I'm working with the PTA just tomorrow actually on developing a survey for parents to use almost as a screening so that we can eventually norm it and use it as another data point.
yeah. Well, and that's so helpful because I mean, I am a big proponent that parents have a perspective about a child, and they carry that historical knowledge of the different things a student has maybe struggled with or their strengths as well. And so, we may not, as educators, we may not always see every single strength within the classroom, and so that's a fantastic sort of just step that you took to add that in there. And I know that every parent is also a stakeholder within that the work. So bringing them on board because we talk a lot about that here at Branching Minds, just like how do you involve parents and when's the right time and how that work is done. So that's a great example. I'm excited to share that with our audience as well. Because part of the reason I love having these conversations with people who are doing the work is because schools across the country are wanting ideas or how do people make this happen. And so maybe you talked a little bit about some of the challenges you met, but are there any other key challenges that you encountered within this process, or even currently, sort of just things that you're hoping to overcome, or barriers to work through?
I don't know if it's a challenge, but I think that in, for me, making sure that teachers have an understanding that this is a system and it is cyclical, and it's not just I'm giving you this PD and now we're going to forget about it. Every 3 months we're coming back to this and we're going through this again. So for me, it I don't want to say it's a challenge, but it just I think like we have to retrain certain teachers' brains and to think how we look at data. A lot of times, and this is due to the way certain performance data was rolled out in New York State. Teachers think data and they think it's a reflection of them. And that's not the point of this. The point of this and getting them to understand, the point of this is to look at their students so that they are informed so that they can educate them better and make them be able to move further along in the curriculum. So that mind shift for me, I think, is just and it's not going to happen overnight, but I think us having the 3 times a year where we're looking at this and having that slow rollout but very explicit, I think has been a challenge, but one that I think that we're doing well in overcoming.
And I'd add that the challenge also is the use of faculty meeting time, because in the past, each principal was able to design their agenda to their particular building. But now we're looking 3 times a year, like Theresa says, for them to be presenting to their faculty the data about their building. And typically at the high school, that might have looked like we have state assessments at the end of the year, the September meeting, like, yay, us, these were our last year's results, which the relevancy of that for some in the room may not be there, if they didn't teach that particular course. But knowing each marking period, this is the percentage of students that did well across the board. And, our well is defined as getting at least 80% of our students 80% or higher. So, then they at least have a mark. Teaching can be a very isolating profession if you're just in your classroom all day and measuring your kids against your own kids. Whereas you can say, wow, I put a little bit of a new strategy here, and look, it's already paying dividends because my students performed a little bit more than the average. And it also has teachers reflecting that maybe there isn't something working with the curriculum they gave us. And I'm noticing that I'm not getting 80% of my students through. So it's not my implementation of what they gave me. It's what they gave me is just not efficient for the students I have before me, which really helps us at the district level make critical decisions about some of the curricular programs we have in place, or some of the purchase programs we have in place.
Yeah. Well, and I was gonna ask, sort of sitting in the superintendent lens, how has the MTSS process or structure maybe changed your role, or not even changed your role, but impacted the work that you do? Has it changed what you're doing, or has it just put a different lens on things? I'm just curious about that.
I know the work is a 3-year rollout, but what is making me sleep better at night is I know 3 times a year I'm going to know how the district is doing, where I think that is something a lot of folks don't walk around with. Being equipped with the data about how your district's doing allows you to do the role of a superintendent in the PR around the district. For instance, last year, 93% of our kindergartners left reading at grade level. That's an incredible number to walk around with when the community's looking at what's the return on our investment. We pay taxes to support the schools. Well, here's the return. And then you can grow it all the way up to the 12th grade to say we had 100% graduation rate. So you can see the leading and the lagging indicators. The other part is, in every building, depending on the principal and the different administrators, the students and teachers, they have their own crises and chaos that occurs just because we deal with people all day long. Knowing that we have put in place a system that has everyone setting aside this time allows not their entire day to be consumed by other factors. They know they have this time set aside, that Teresa's coming to review their data. They are expected to turn around and do that with their faculty. And then their faculty is expected to do it within their departments and all grade levels. So knowing that system is getting in place this year will have me less worried about burnout among folks, that they know we will get there and we have this system to review. So you don't have to panic when you get a new piece of data that says 75% of your grade is reading on grade level. We have a system in place to address that.
Hi, everyone. I am interrupting this conversation to share another MTSS hero shout out. These are those educators that go above and beyond and deserve recognition and celebration for their hard work in their school. Today, I want to celebrate Misty from Center, Colorado. She is an interventionist, and several different colleagues sang her praises this year. This is what her colleagues say about her. Misty goes above and beyond to support the students and help her peers. She observes students who may need added support in some areas. She tutors students when she has time and has several senior students who she champions. She does sit-in visits, walk-and talks, credit checks, phone calls home visits, and knock-and-talk visits for attendance. But her biggest contribution is the connection she makes with all students. She is a true team player and only wants what is best for the students of our district. Thank you, Misty, for all that you do for your students and your school. We celebrate you. Now, back to our conversation. Thinking about maybe the cultural changes, right? Because we know it's not just the technical aspects of changing a system, but there's also sort of that adaptive change that comes through the cultural. Every school district has a culture around the work. And so I'm just curious to maybe if either of you could speak about that, maybe the mind shifts challenges, or even just like how you've addressed sort of the different approaches.
Great question.
Yeah.
You're new.
Yeah.
You get to
Yeah.
view. It's nice having someone brand new. Like, what do you think about our culture?
Yeah, that absolutely. So, and I think for me, what I notice, and I've spoke to this already, but is the culture at the different levels. So the culture in the elementary school is very much data driven, and looking at how can we advance our students. There's so much growth that happens in elementary school, so they're constantly looking at data points to assess how they're doing, how the students are doing, what do we need to put in place in order for them to be successful. So I think this cyclical approach to looking at data and implementing interventions was part of the culture in our elementary schools. And it not that teachers weren't putting in supports for students at the middle and high school. It looked very, very different, and it wasn't systematic. It was so for me, the system piece of it, I think, is a cultural change. Like as we said, it's a very large district. There's two different middle schools. So getting everyone together on the same page, all doing the same thing, that has been, I think, a huge cultural change. As far as us, again, always wanting what's best for our students, that of course was here. That's nothing new. It's a very successful school district, and they're always going to support the students. But it's getting them to understand that we're doing this 3 times a year, every year moving forward, and each year we're going to add a little something else. Next year we're going to be looking at the library on branching minds, and that's going to be another thing that we're going to talk to them and expose them to, and start to use a little bit more. So I think that's been part of the cultural shift.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And another cultural shift, and I'm sure you see it across the country in the schools you work with, is that education falls prey to the what's cool this year, right? So you'll see many magnificent plans on different districts' websites, and veteran people in the field know I can wait this out because we'll be gone, and the new person has something shiny and new they're going to buy at the next flea market of educational programs and products. So that's the cultural shift here has kind of been like, this really is it. We're really committed to it. And what we have working in its favor is a 5-year strategic plan where this was a goal. The community collaboratively said, we want a district-wide MTSS plan. We want to make sure every student's looked at several times throughout the year. And research-based interventions are applied when students don't respond, and their attendance doesn't get better, their behavior doesn't get better, their connections to school do not feel tighter. But we also were working with the benefit of coming out of the pandemic. There was an urgency among everybody that how are the kids? So if
Mhm.
you don't have a tool to measure and to review, and besides just he has a B plus in the class, branching minds and the different surveys in there and screeners allowed us to look a little bit more deeply at all students.
Yeah. Well, and I do think okay, so I want to speak as an educator that was in the, taught during the pandemic, kind of coming out of it, we were like, oh, we were so excited because this was a little bit of like a clean slate in the sense that we could try a lot of different things. And so it's really exciting to hear that you sort of took that as an opportunity to say, okay, like stepping forward, how are we going to make sure that we're meeting all the needs of the students? And I also want to speak to the idea that when you talked about the cultural shift of embedding it within your plan and then embedding it within what your district is doing over long term. Because I do think that MTSS has that advantage that it's an umbrella kind of framework. So there's a lot of different initiatives or practices or resources that are envelop the other work that kind of can shift based on the new resources or things that are available at that time. But I like that you kind of committed to that. When we commit to something long term, we'll more likely see results. It may not be immediate. It's not necessarily a silver bullet that fixes things quickly.
And Larissa, with the various parts of what MTSS requires educators to look at, the academics, the behavioral, the SEL, and the what do I
Attendance.
attendance. We decided as we work through our MTSS plan in its first year, which is this year, we would only focus on the SEL because we knew teachers all have varying levels of knowledge around academic interventions. We have our more sophisticated knowledge among our related service providers and our psychologists and social workers for mental health issues and attendance, and that we have our assistant principals. But we knew everybody was maybe suffering from something we underestimated coming out of the pandemic, which is getting everyone back to do the things we expect them to do, it was hard for some to come back to in-person instruction, and not because of the fear of COVID, but just it was nice being home, you know,
Mhm.
and our students liked taking class from bed.
Yeah.
Like when we were synchronous, it was like that was a teenager's dream. Like, wait, what? No one sees my hair today. I can just do my
Yeah.
calculus class from my bedroom. So I think teaching being such a symbiotic event where you really need your students with you and enjoying what you're doing so that you can get some, I always call it like the teaching mojo. Like if you have a dead class, that's really hard to do. So,
Yeah.
focusing on SEL and equipping teachers maybe with some tier one interventions
Yeah.
to get everyone connected
Uh,
might kind of
Yeah,
energize the classroom
definitely.
a little
Yeah.
bit.
And that was for me, a lot of the work I did with the high school was that the tier one interventions on how do we develop relationships with our students, and how when we develop those relationships, it in turn makes the student more likely to come to class, more likely to perform better on tests, more likely to hand their homework in. So it's all connected. We also did a lot of work this year bringing in community circles.
Yeah.
And that was something that, as a district, again, we trained. I didn't, but Mary trained all the administrators on that. And that was another tier one interventions that we trained everyone with and gave them that tool to kind of work through and create those relationships in the classroom so that they could. Um, the students could feel comfortable and not be in a risk-free learning environment and take chances with their learning, and all the things we know, if are in place, they'll ultimately perform better.
Yeah. Well, and those are so key, like, right? It's just meeting the basic needs of human beings, right? Before they're ready to learn, and helping them feel safe, is such a huge part of that. And so building relationships. I like that you guys are sort of making it progressive, because also as a teacher, would be very appreciative of not having a ton of new things to start, incoming in sort of like getting back to the sort of routine of being in school, or all of the different things, with trying not to overwhelm teachers, because I'm sure that that's a factor that you've thought about. And this is a question, and I'm excited to have a superintendent on the podcast, because I want to ask these questions about how has this impacted your teachers? Like, what has been sort of the perception of that? Like, maybe in even impacting teacher retention, because that's a thing we talk about all the time, is that how is that impacting the teachers' work experience?
Listen, we'll be really honest and realistic with you. It doesn't really matter how you do anything that has a different name starting a school year feels like here's something else we have to do. And that's one of the challenges we face, but we were really focused on we know the power of this, so you just have to trust and go with us. So that's why we tried to make it a slow roll, that you have 3 PDs, you will do this systematically with an expert in the front of the room. And really in year 1 the expectations were low as far as how much integration they would have with the platform, but still it still felt like this is something new I have to learn, and that's a really hard place to be. And I'm not going to say we fought against it, but that was a real factor in the work we did. But you know what I know about our teachers is that eventually when they know I'm going to invest the time to learn it, this is an administration that doesn't make it go away when the superintendent goes to another conference and buys something else at a flea market. So we're not like that here, and most of my colleagues aren't as well. So hopefully that initial like, oh, what's this new thing at superintendent's conference day they're going to make us do, they have seen that it hasn't been as oppressive as maybe they initially thought.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And I mean, I always think it's about how you go about implementing the new thing, right? It's, if it's day 1, your high expectations of what you're supposed to do, um, and also I've heard this too, is just like doing too much at a time. Like if you have this plus something else, like that's too much. And I've had those years where it felt like we had 5 different things we had to start, and that was not fun
Yeah.
too. So,
You bring up
um
a good point because there's some things at the different levels in the organization you may not be aware there's a new something. For instance, our math program at the K to 6 level had an upgrade. So for those teachers, that felt like 2 new things. Even though at my level, it's like we're still using the same program, but they did an upgrade, the online
Mm.
version of it, which that requires different learning on teachers' part. So, you can never make it a change-free zone. However, you're right. And you have to make sure that some of the newer administrators on the team who are trying to really enhance because of their new position, that you assure them that's okay for you to slow down because this bigger district
Yeah.
initiative is in
Yeah.
play right now.
And I think also part of it, the MTSS process, whether we called it MTSS or if it was called, IST meetings or RTI rather, it was always here. What's new is that this year it's a district-wide systematic plan that we are following, cyclically,
Yeah.
and I think so it's new in that regard, but the process and us making sure that students aren't struggling and has always been here. So
Yeah.
it's new, but it's I want to say it's like rebranded.
But you know what? When you use branching minds, it's recorded somewhere, which also
Oh, that's
has
been
another
great.
level anxiety for folks because
Yeah.
it's like, who's looking at that? And
Yeah.
okay, you said we can kind of learn this at our own pace, but at one point you're going to look and see if I did anything. And whenever we ask people to put data somewhere, there is right around the corner is accountability. So, we had to assure like no one's in trouble here.
Right.
We're going to do this with great benevolence and assumption of benevolence. But that's a cultural change too. That
Yeah.
there's not
Well,
a
and
big
I
brother
was gonna
coming down
say
saying you didn't do it, you didn't do it well.
Right.
yeah. Well, and I would say, like, I love that you sort of are thinking about that because there's often times where I think educators may even think, "Do the leaders even understand this
Yes.
what we're doing the day to day?" Because
They always
right?
do.
Yeah.
It's us
Yes.
versus them. Do they
Yes.
get all the things I have to do in a day, and they're asking me to do these extra things? When I talk to educators that are thinking about leaving the field, they sort of cite that the fact I have to do all these things that aren't teaching, right? And so I love that you're thinking about that as a factor, as something to address, or even just to be considerate of, or even encouraging your school leaders to be considerate of that because that those sometimes those are the little things that are just the last needle, the last thread. So
You bring up an excellent point because two things had to happen in advance. First of all, our teachers union we're in regular conversation with, and one of the things they had been complaining about when we were a district of schools in this area is teachers were being asked to put data in a lot of different places. An ELA chairperson wanted it on a spreadsheet, someone wanted it in an email, someone wanted it on the system. And that was a regular complaint. Like you're asking for similar data in different places. That's overwhelming. So we're hoping this fixes it. But for the first year, it felt like, oh, here's one more place you're asking us to
Yeah.
put data. But the second thing is when you think of at the superintendent level is your collective bargaining agreements. Do you have the time of day? Does the district own a certain part of the day for this work to happen? If you haven't put that in a plan of a teacher's work year or work day, then it does feel like that. Like you added this new thing, but I am still contractually obliged to be teaching kids this amount of minutes. So we really, through two collective bargaining agreements, have captured a few times where we feel the teachers can do this work. Um,
yeah,
but we'll get better at that too. But you have
yeah.
to really have the whole system working for something this large to truly take root and be effective, so it impacts students.
Yeah. Well, and I think you bring up an excellent point. I think working with your teachers union, I mean, they're there to do the advocacy work for those for teachers. And so working with them to, have that a part of the contract is really key. That time and protecting that time too. Cause I think that is often it's easy to assume that the time is there, but if you really have it designated, it can help ease teachers minds too of like, I know that this is a part of the contract, and that's what that is designed for. So okay, I love hearing sort of about this process, even just like the nitty-gritty stuff that I think there's oftentimes we can surface over in a quick presentation, or, things like that. I think the little things are what matters. So, I'm curious though, given the fact that some of your elementary schools were doing some of this work, how did you go about identifying the work that you wanted to sort of bring under the MTSS practices, or like what are the things that you were already doing, and how did you maybe then scale them to district wide, or scale them from one middle school to the other? Maybe what were some of those steps that you took there?
So I think that at the elementary schools, the reading chairperson, she did a lot of data review with the principals and the reading teachers, and they would look at just the students that were getting reading AIS and whether they were progressing and whether they needed to more interventions or less interventions. But that was just happening with the students that were getting services. So I think the school wide meeting and getting the principals to look at all students' data, that has been something that is a change, but something that's been, very well received, because they were doing it, but not necessarily for all students. So now it's happening for all students. So I think that's wonderful. And again, at the middle level and at the high school level too, it's all students. We are looking at all students' data. And then that sharing out to the entire faculty is equally important. And again, that's happening now in all of the different levels of the schools as well. So sharing that at a faculty meeting, and then asking them the questions, having them do a little bit of problem solving and hypothesizing. And we've put together some Padlets, so the teachers can give us some feedback as to why they think scores went up or down, or why a certain group might be not performing as well as others. Just, and what I've shared with the teachers when we've talked about that is, we're not looking for necessarily answers. This is a problem solving cycle, and we want to try things out, and hopefully they work and they help students. And if they do, then let's continue to do that. But if they don't, we need to reassess and try something different. So that's been something I think that's really exciting, and that was sort of taking place, but morphed a little, and is now taking place district wide.
Yeah.
And I would say the previous MTSS meetings across the district were just so time consuming. When you think that 5% of the population should be struggling at an extreme level, needing a tier 3 intervention, in a school that has nearly 500 students, or a school that has over 1,000, you cannot host that many individual student meetings. So what was great about our plan is it has levels of meetings that don't require everybody, and it's not about the highest need students. And the goal is that the grade level meeting is where a lot of the thinking and planning will go on among a small group of educators who are teaching a similar group of students. And if they can apply interventions to prevent that 20% of student body becoming the 5%. But that was the big complaint at the elementary. They would spend all day in an MTSS meeting because 5 students were recommended. And if you have the reading teacher related service, you're pulling teachers, it just was falling under the weight of itself. And then teachers stopped recommending student 2, 3, 4 because they could only get one on the calendar. So what
Mm,
happens to student 2, 3, 4 in that? That becomes a problem. They don't get the attention they need.
yeah. Yeah. And that I know that, like, yeah, the time consuming, if you can make the most of your time and have ways to do that, it makes the work happen quicker, or it's just like you can help more students. I I have one last question, and I wanted to talk specifically about the leadership piece of this kind of work. I know that we talked maybe with some of the technical parts of it, but, like, do you feel like there were any kind of leadership practices or strategies, or even just a mindset that, as your leadership team, the cabinet and anyone at district office sort of took on, like, is there any sort of leadership philosophy that you follow that you think that made this work more impactful, or just even made this work possible?
My leadership philosophy really focuses on building relationships, and it's the type of leader I am. It was the type of teacher I am. So for me, I think, establishing, especially coming in new, establishing relationship with the administrative team, getting to know them, establishing relationships with the chair people and the directors, making sure that they had a good understanding of the plan, of their role within the plan, of my role within the plan, what it would look like in their buildings, role playing that for them, so that they felt very comfortable going out to their staff with it. I think was very important for me. And then, in turn, with the teachers, building the relationships when I do have PD with the teachers, and getting to know them and making myself available for them. That's the one thing that's good, as the point person for this. It's such a large part of what I do that if teachers have questions, I'm always open and available to help them and support them and work with them on something. So that's my philosophy as a leader, to be there for my people. And I think that helped me in establishing my role, and then also rolling out the plan throughout the year.
Yeah.
Theresa said it perfectly. It really is in the plan naming who is doing what, because
Mm,
you know what can happen very easily. It's this. And if you have principals that are looking at data and they're in front of the students struggling, but you have instructional leaders, department chair people, going out with lofty ideals of what could get done curricularly, that really they run into each other, and it becomes a frustration, and then you have a morale issue among your leadership team. So, to Theresa's credit, she has worked side by side with each stakeholder in the meetings of, this is your role, and I'm coming to make sure we do this together. This is like department chair people, they do the department content area meetings, and this is your role in that. So that's been extremely helpful in preventing this or any kind of derision happening among the leadership team.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing about the work that you guys are doing. I love hearing that. I just love hearing the story because it helps make sense of the work and maybe even can give insight to our listeners or any district leaders out there wanting to do that work of like, how is this possible? How can we go about the work? So anything you would share for someone who's maybe just getting started with the MTSS process, any advice that you would leave them with?
Come to us. Well, no, just come to us. Come to Plainview, Beth Page. Great community, wonderful bagels, excellent pizza. We feed you when you come. And really, we love working with other districts.
Yeah.
We had several districts come here. And I would really say, find a partner who's done the work. When you're trying to do something, find someone who's doing it successfully, and make sure they're really following their plan so they can inform accordingly.
Yeah, definitely collaboration is key, and it's a resource, especially here on the island. There's so many school districts. So hosting that user group meeting a few months ago was very powerful, and it was wonderful to share our experiences and learn from others. So, don't be hesitant to reach out and ask for help or share your good ideas with others.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your time today and just chatting. It was great to hear more about the work and excited to see where you guys go in the next few years.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us,
Thanks.
Theresa.
Have a great day.
All right, take care.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Branching Minds.